Welcome to Christology Lesson 4. Just to catch up, we have spent the last 3 weeks talking about the identity of who Jesus Christ is, right? And what we said we'd start out with at the beginning of this class is really wrestling with some questions about that identity. So we first looked at in the start, we looked at not who we think Christ is, but we try to go to the source. Who did he claim to be? And in those claims, we came away with kind of a definitive answer on that. We'll review that quickly in the next couple slides. And then we looked at this question for the last 2 weeks, really, of his humanity and his deity. How could he be fully human and fully God? So that's paradox that we're going to have to continually struggle with. And so we're going to put that question aside tonight a little bit and look specifically at his earthly life, because we've dealt with his humanity. So I want to look at his life and maybe tonight try to take away some lessons from God coming into the world. What can we learn about God in the world? What is it about his experience in the world that we could take away and apply practically to our lives? When we looked at the claims, who Jesus claimed to be, he claimed to be Jehovah. He claimed to be the God who will judge all the nations. He claimed to be glorified or have the glory that was present before he had come into the world and asked for the Father to restore that glory to him. He claimed to be the Alpha and the Omega. He claimed to be equal with God the Father. He claimed to be one with God the Father. And he claimed to be the revelation of God the Father. So when we think about that, one of the things that struck me about that week was there's a sense of discomfort we have in looking at Jesus as God incarnate, God in the flesh, God in the world, because there's this kind of moment where we go, wait a minute, that's who he is? Wait a minute, God came into the world? Okay, I can take this person of Jesus Christ and I can make him who I want or what I think about him and kind of compartmentalize that, but I can't do that really once I realize that it was actually God here. God came here. Right? And so the problem I have with that is then it comes back on me to all the implications of what it means if God's in the world. So there's this discomfort that we have with this. And you'll see this in the church today, and you'll see this in maybe even in our own interactions, where we'll revert to the title of Son of God, because somehow there's maybe a connotation that that's less than God. But that's not the claim that Christ was making. He was fully God. And the implications of the fullness of God coming into the world, well, they're big. And they're things that potentially make us a little uncomfortable, okay? By the way, they make everybody else uncomfortable too. So how can he claim to be God and yet be human? Well, we looked at his humanity, and we looked at the things that are evidenced of his humanity. He was tired, he was hungry, he wept, he had emotion, he was physical, there was a physical element to him, he had a physical body. John talked about this, he said he held them, and he was saying these, John repeatedly says this in the letters to kind of fight against this view that Christ came as a spirit only, a Gnostic view that he was some kind of mirage or some kind of image that didn't have a physical body, because in the Gnostic view, material or matter is evil. And so John specifically was fighting against that. For us, we know that it's just evidence of his humanness. He had a physical body like we did. He experienced things in the same way in the view. And the lesson in that is, in the lesson in his humanity was there were multiple lessons for us to take away with. One was, he knows what we're going through. He has experienced creation. The Creator has experienced creation from the creation's viewpoint, not from just the Creator's viewpoint. And that's really a remarkable revelation of who God is, that he'd be willing to do that, right? That he'd be willing to step into the thing that he made in the form that he made it in order to be close to us, in order to reach us. It's just remarkable to the lengths at which God will go. And so if you're kind of in that place tonight, or if you're ministering to somebody who's in a place where they go, well, I'm not good enough, or God can't see me where I'm at, or I can't be reached where I'm at. Think about what you're saying, because God has already extended the effort to step into his creation. He's already done that, right? There isn't anything he won't do to reach you. There isn't anything. And this is his humanity is evidence of that. But there's a bigger lesson in his humanity, because there was an exchange made, and it was in his humanity that that exchange had to occur. There was the only way that the righteousness of God could be satisfied, and so his physical body and the payment for sin, and you see here in Romans 5:7, for one scarcely will die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare to even die. But God showed his love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Okay, since therefore we have now been justified by his blood, no humanity, no blood. Not just any blood, but the blood of a righteous man, the only righteous man. The only blood in the entire history of humanity that can offer up a fair and even exchange for our unrighteousness. So it had to be in his humanity that the form and the function of which God was going to effect salvation would occur. Okay, so he claimed to be God, but what's the evidence of that? Maybe he was just human. He was just a really good human, right? This is the other argument. This is the one that we mostly revert to. This is the one that the world reverts to, because it says, well, there was a guy and he made these claims and he was probably a good guy. Maybe he was a good teacher, but he in no way was God. And so that's where the line stops, and that's where the world wants it to stop. So what's the evidence that he was God? Well, we have first-hand accounts in the Gospels of the types of works of healing that were done, and we noted in the works of healing that there's still today, with all of the advances in medical in medicine, still today issues that are hardly dealt with well. Healing of the blind, the mute, leprosy, epilepsy, issues of blood, withering of hands, deaf. These are things that are either not easily dealt with today or not dealt with today, even today, 2,000 years later. And there are records of Christ coming in and resolving these issues. You can't make blind people see today. Yet he rubs some mud on eyes and they're seeing. And in the accounts on the blind people that are healed, the accounts are not just of the person who sees, but of the reaction of everybody around them. They can't believe it, right? What they say is, must be somebody else. This can't be your son. Tell us, he was just faking, remember? Right? I mean, that the writers actually capture the audience's account because they want you to know this was a really big deal. Right? The healings themselves evidence a supernatural power. Now, we live in an age, a postmodern age, where in the modern age, the world was looked at as a closed system, meaning nothing outside of the world exists. So there can't be something supernatural. And we still mostly believe that today. We explain it away. We're highly skeptical people right now. Skepticism in and of itself is not a bad thing as long as you fairly look at the evidence. And we said when we looked at the evidence of these types of healings recorded, they testify of a supernatural power. And then I pointed you to works, scholarly works done showing miracles continuing today, evidence of supernatural power, the dead coming back to life, right? Being recorded today. And so the evidence of something outside of our closed system, evidencing the existence of something supernatural.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay, we're talking about Jesus performing the miracles and the healings. Okay, how do we respond to someone, and I've had this happen, someone who will say to me, that's all considered sorcery and hocus pocus, because even back as far as Moses, when Moses was, doing the, when Moses was cursing the Egyptians, with the frogs, the this, the that, the Pharaoh also had his group of little sorcerers that, were making snakes and bugs and all of that.
Yeah. So
how do you respond to that when they say, well, isn't this just like magic?
Okay, so it's a great question. The question is, how do we differentiate between what the world shows as what would be viewed as sorcery or magic or even cheap parlor tricks, right? And how do we differentiate that between real supernatural power? How do we differentiate those two? And you pointed back to somebody saying, well, even if you looked at the 10 plagues in the Exodus in Egypt, you would say that Moses did one, and then it was met by Pharaoh's sorcerers or magicians or wise men. And the problem with that is that it's met up until a point, right? When it gets to real power and real plagues and real issues, there was no answer on the other side of the equation. And so, yes, water could be turned to blood in a small area, right? But when the locust came, there was no counter attack to that. Why? Because there was an evidence of power, and maybe even purposefully here, a stepped evidence of power. What's being offered here, though, in Jesus' demonstration is not just the healing power, but he points to that. If you see in slide 8 here, in Matthew 11:4, it says, "Go tell John the things which you hear and see. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. And the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them." This was not just some guy walking around doing things randomly. First of all, each of these were prophesied about prior. When these things happen, Messiah is here. And he's pointing to that. That's what he's specifically quoting here in Matthew 11. He's telling John, remind him of what the prophets said would occur, and then go tell him what you saw. Don't just tell him what the prophets said. Tell him what you saw, which turns out to be exactly what the prophets said. Okay? So it wasn't a randomness to this action. It was a very specific God calling his shot several hundred years in advance, and then him showing up and doing it exactly the way he said he was going to do it. Now, there's a separation here, all right? And the separation is the power not just to heal, but he demonstrated the power over nature itself, the wind and the sea, over the plant life, over the laws of nature, and then finally over death itself. He demonstrates that not just in the raising of the dead. Again, Craig Keener's work on miracles demonstrates these events occurring today, continually occurring today. So show me somebody raising the dead, and I'm going to be paying attention to them. And Christ has not just done that in his ministry to uniquely demonstrate his power, but to demonstrate the power in his name. And then he does it himself in overcoming death as a declaration for us overcoming death ourselves. All right? So there's a different category here. There's the, let's play card tricks over here and let's make claims about the card tricks. And then there's the supernatural power over life and death. And that's the kind of power that's being demonstrated here and is unexplainable. And mostly, I would say, for those that have questions about this, I would ask them to think about those questions. What about this makes you uncomfortable? What is it about the idea of something so enormous, so powerful, potentially coming into the world? What is that about it that makes you uncomfortable? Because it's that that's causing the skepticism. It's that that's saying, look, this is so big and so hard to get my hands on, I'm just going to put it over here with all the other wacky stuff that the enemy is doing to say, look, just ignore it. I'll show you parlor tricks too, right? And the world wants that to be categorized in that area. No, these are life-changing events, right? And you see that in the testimony. Now, we have, unfortunately, those that are preaching in the name of Christ who are pretending in the name of Christ. And so we have people who are in wheelchairs, who are not really in wheelchairs, that are being pretend healed. But there are real healings. I've seen them, I've witnessed them, I've participated in them. And when you see that, there is no question about the existence and the power of God. And there is no explanation for it other than the reality of God. And so the challenge for us is to get people to see that and to see through the noise. And also not be in a hurry. I mean, you could present the evidence. It doesn't mean they need to make the decision right away. They have to work through that information. Okay? All right. What can we learn from Jesus' earthly life? So he made claims about his deity. He demonstrated his humanity by being born into the world. And then he walked the earth. And so the implications really that we're starting with in this question is God came into the world. What should we know about that? What do I want to take away from that? What can I apply in my life about that? Because God came into the world. And so if I think my life is really messed up, and it is, and I think that I get it wrong most of the time, and I do, what is it about looking to God walking into the world that I can learn from? And really, if we were to think about ourselves as disciples, it just means followers. If I'm going to follow, I need clarity on the thing that I'm following, right? So here is the picture of what I want to follow. And if we do nothing else in our ministry but point to the examples of what it looked like when God walked the earth in the flesh and say, well, hey, you want to know the right way to do it? Let me tell you about Jesus. He did it this way. Are you struggling with something? Let me tell you what Jesus did when he struggled with something. You want to know how to bring joy and peace and love into the world? Let me show you what Jesus did. I mean, that's all we really need to do, right? As followers of Christ, we don't need to have any of the answers. We have this fantastic example to look at. So I think it's really important for us to examine that over and over again. When you're reading the Gospels, look at that and don't just look at it with a distance. Go, wait a minute, that's God walking in the world. How do I take that and live that today? How do I take that and apply that to my life today? How do I tell others about that? That's the challenge for us. So there are two aspects in the lesson that we talk about. One is his sinless nature in the world. And this is immediately where I kind of shut off when we get to sinlessness and go, yeah, but he's God and I'm not. And therefore, there's no other way for me to I can't be like that. So it kind of excuses my sin nature, doesn't it? When I go, well, he's perfect and I'm not. And so when we get on this topic of his sinlessness, I tend to, I don't know if you do this, but I tend to go, yeah, but he's God. So I can't get there. I'll try, and maybe I'll have a couple good days, where I sin less, but I'm not sinless. And then I get to the point where maybe I'm even frustrated by that and go, yeah, but he's God and I'm not, and so I can't be sinless. I'm not saying we can, but I'm saying that there is a lesson in his sinlessness that we need to learn from so that we can apply it. And that lesson is in his obedience. Look what it says here. It says in 1 Peter 2, 21 and 22, for to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps. Wait, God came into the world, and then he did what he did, and he showed us what to do, so I can do it too. Okay, that's pretty easy. That's a lot easier than I thought it would be. Who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth. Wait a minute, wait, hold on. Follow his steps, and he's sinless. How am I going to do that? Right? I mean, how am I going to follow in his steps? And as followers, this is where we tend to create distance behind our following. because we fall further and further back, and then we get frustrated, and then we go, I'm not being the witness and the testimony that I want to be. And then we go back and we revert back to our old habits and our old ways. Why? That's exactly what the enemy would prefer us to do. Nothing has changed. The target is in front of us. Christ is in front of us. He's leading us. And all we need to do is keep our eye on that example and follow it. How? The key to his sinlessness. Jesus' earthly life was a model, an example for us to do what we're called to do in him. He was obedient to the point of death, and as a result became the author of our salvation. It's because of this we're called to obey him. The key to his sinlessness is his obedience to the Father, his obedience to the will of the Godhead. So he steps down from his glorified position in the Godhead into humanity. Obedience. He's the one who went, right? He puts aside his glory and steps into humanity, knowing that he's going to be made king of the world. Yeah, that'll come another time, but in this advent, in this coming, not so much. He's coming to be what? Despised, hated, beaten, tortured, killed. Obedience. Came in anyway. Did what he was called to do. Right? His obedience leads him to that sinlessness. Now, if we think about that in contrast to Adam, Adam was told one thing. Don't do one thing. Christ was demonstrating obedience in all things. Right? Adam was told, don't do this one thing, and he did it. Did it anyway. It's exactly how we fall into sin. We know what to do and what not to do. We know it. So God says he's written it on our hearts now. There's the Holy Spirit telling us constantly, don't do that. Do this. Go this way. What we do, we shut that voice off. Right? We shut that direction and that guidance off. He says he's going to give us the author of all truth. He's going to give us the spirit of all truth. And yet, we do the thing that we're not supposed to do. Exactly what Paul says. I do the thing I don't want to do, and I don't do the thing I should do. Right? Why? Obedience. The issue is obedience. And here, it's an example to us. In his sinlessness isn't something that's unattainable. It's an example to us in how we overcome our sin nature. Because we're being given the power and the guidance and the truth to do exactly what God wants for us in our lives. All we have to do is be obedient to it, to follow it. Now, a couple things about obedience. Principally, one thing about obedience. It just requires us to make a commitment to it. It requires us to make a decision up front. It's a great time of year, right? It's the new year. What did everybody do last week? They made a resolution. The resolution was, I'm going to stop eating. I'm going to work out more. I'm going to get healthier. I'm going to do all the things that I didn't want to be doing in my life. What's the difference between their lifestyle 2 weeks ago and their lifestyle now? They're trying to make a change. The ones that will have committed to that. They've made a commitment to that change. They made a commitment, and they will be obedient to that. They will follow it because they made a commitment to it. They have clarity to it. To us, in our lesson here, in Christ's sinless nature, it's an understanding of what's required of us, which is that obedience, that following, and our commitment to doing that. And then our reverting back to that. All right, so I think this is a critical aspect of Christ's earthly lesson, because his earthly walk, and something that we can learn, because I think there's an assumption that we make in our sin nature that we cannot possibly follow all that God has for us, and yet the reality is we're called to. We can't escape that calling. We can't escape it, and we can't excuse it. We're called to. So the key to all of that is our obedience to it. Now, tonight, in about 20 minutes, when I walk out the door and I trip and I fall over my obedience and I miss, do I stop? No. I have to get back up again and restart and recommit and move forward to it. Do I go from 0 to hero in one step. No, I'm not going to make that leap. There are habits and issues that I have to correct and break in my life. But I have a clear image and a picture and a person that I'm following, and I have to move towards that person. And that's the critical issue for us in Christ's earthly life. Watch him. He comes in, he says, "Hi, how you doing? Follow me." Right? He's not in the back, he's in the front, he's leading, his followers are following him. They're going wherever we don't see any, well, actually the only time we see an account where he says, "Let's go here," and they say, "That's a really bad idea," is when they're headed to Jerusalem the last time. Right? But for the most part, they're not walking around going, "Man, where are we going? We've been walking for days. Does this guy have any idea where we're going?" No, they're following him. How? Obediently. What do they get from it? What did we just look at? We saw the evidence of his deity. They saw God healing. They saw the power of God evidenced right in front of them. Why? Because they were obediently following. See the benefit of that? If I trip and fall 20 minutes outside the door over my obedience, meaning God tells me to do something and I decide I'm going to not do it, I then have to get back up and I have to follow it again, and I have to find my direction, and I have to keep following him. And in that, we move towards sinlessness. We move towards his nature. We become more Christ-like, which was what his plan is, for us to be his disciples, and not just followers, but to be his messengers of who he is in this world. What else can we learn from his earthly life? Well, turns out he's a pretty good teacher, too. He was all of the things that the world thinks of him today. He was the best teacher in humanity because he brought a message specifically that was taught that the world needed to hear. God's here, God loves us, and God's calling us. Pretty good message. And so in his earthly life, you can see, first of all, I see a lot of his energy and his effort being put into that message. I don't see a lot of his energy and a lot of his effort being put into the cares of the world. He seemed to be just immune to that, right? He seemed to have such clarity. Christ had such clarity to the idea that political situation in Rome, I can spend a lot of time fretting about it, but it really doesn't matter. Why? Because he had an eternal kingdom of God perspective, not a temporal kingdom of man perspective. And this is a tough one for us, right? Our message can be confused and it can be dampened by the idea of what's going on in this world. And that's hard for us because we have real cares and we have real concerns and they're real issues in our lives. So how do we take those and put them in the proper perspective of Christ's message? How do we do that, right? How do we take that and do what he did? In his teaching, the first thing he does is he spends time with the Father, gets up and prays. It's a pretty good earthly lesson for us to take away. He spends time with the Father. He usually spent time away. He got up, he went away, found a quiet place. He spent time communing with God. I look at that as just being filled up, being ready for the world. So that as the world tries to wear me down, it really can't because I'm filled with the power and the presence of God. And I notice in my life a dramatic difference in the times when I'm being filled and how I behave in the world versus the times where I think I'm too busy for that stuff. And I skip the prayer thing, and I skip the reading thing, and I skip the quiet time with God thing, and I go right to the cups of coffee and the email. And once I get there, man, I'm an entirely different person. Why? Because I haven't had my perspective focused in the right place first. So the cares and the concerns of the world easily overwhelm me there. So the lesson for us in his earthly life is how he is creating this immune system to the cares of the world. The second thing he does in that is then he's able to take that and carry his message forward. I know what's important. I know what my priority is. I know what my mission is. Let me go do that. I can't do that first. And this is maybe where we fail as a church at times. In our zeal to be ministers, we try to do it on our own, by ourselves, with our energy and power, not with God's energy and power. So without him, it's just a good story. It's a powerless story. The enemy's pretty powerful. He'll easily overcome that. And we'll easily be discouraged. By the way, the testimony and the witness that we create is not good. But if I'm communing with God, and then I'm sharing that communion with God to the world, that's powerful. That's also insulated. Can't be disturbed. That's what he did with his followers. He called them. He said, follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. Notice that the way he's training his disciples is first, they're to follow him, what we just talked about. And then second, they're in his presence. When they're learning to minister and actually ministering, he sends them out later. He says, okay, now I did this, now you go do this. I showed you how to do this, now you go do this. Right? He healed, they healed. He cast demons out, they cast demons out. And so in his presence, those things are possible. That's the model that he shows us in his earthly life. Come follow me. Come be with me. The rest will be clear. One of the other things, just to note in Mark 1:16 and 17, this is exactly how I wouldn't do it. It's why I'm so grateful for who God is. See, if I were looking to train disciples, I'd come up and say, okay, here's the plan. First, we're going to get a whole bunch of disciples. Then I'm going to spend a whole bunch of years training you. And then you're going to go out and practice that. Then we're going to come back and talk about it. Then we're going to make some changes. And then you're going to go back out and do it again. And then what's going to happen is I'm going to go to Jerusalem and die. Well, let's skip that part. No, I mean, I would want to lay out the steps, right? For those that were going to follow me. Why? Because I'd want you to know what's going to happen here. Look at what Christ does. He doesn't do any of that. He just says follow. I'm not going to tell you anything about what happens next. Now, he may do that in dreams and visions. He may give you moments and glimpses of what's happening next. But what he absolutely expects after you've encountered him and after you've surrendered to him, he absolutely expects, there's that word again, obedience, faith in the following. We were not going to know the next steps. It's okay. One step at a time is going to be remarkable enough, big enough, radical enough, that it's probably in reality all that we can stand. So let's not worry about the next 5 steps. The biggest arguments I have, either with my family members or with my friends or with my partners in business, always revolve around something that we are talking about that's not today. It's not even tomorrow, and it's not next week. It's usually what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years. Truth is, we don't know if we're going to be alive in 2 to 3 years. But we're arguing about it like our life depends upon it right now. Can you see the foolishness of that? Jesus says, follow me when? Not next week, not next month, not next year. He says, today, follow me. I'll make you fishers of men today. Don't worry about tomorrow. Got enough problems on its own. Tomorrow's problems will be big enough. You try to take on tomorrow's problems in today's problems, too many problems. Worry about today. And the only thing you need to worry about is what? Follow me obediently. That's how he lived his earthly life. So I'll kind of close this out because I promised we get this done in this time frame. If God came if God's coming into the world was recorded by the witnesses who walked with him, and the examples of what it meant to be a follower of Christ are clear, and they are, what makes us think that those examples would be any different than being a follower of Christ today? Because he did that 2,000 years ago? Because the disciples were better or more special than us? That they were different? What would be the difference in being a follower of Christ 2,000 years ago versus today? That he was here physically in the flesh? They hadn't seen him risen yet. They hadn't seen him overcome the cross yet when they were following him. We have. What's different about being a follower then and today? My answer, humbly submitted to you, is nothing. Maybe everything. Maybe that the evidence is significantly higher in his existence and in his power and in his presence. 2,000 years later, you're sitting there on the shore with Peter and John, and you're asking him, do you think 2,000 years from now anybody's going to be talking about this? Change the way we record time by it, right? We measure time by that event. So if that's true, and the examples in his earthly life were, follow me obediently, faithfully, then that to me suggests a formula that I can carry out the door. Okay, world's difficult, filled with noise. My life is chaotic and upside down and full of concerns and cares and worries. Follow me today, faithfully. That's Jesus' message to each one of us. That's also the message that we send to others when we minister to them. I don't know how. I honestly don't. For each one of you in your lives, I don't know exactly what that means. Good news is I'm not supposed to. He does. Do what he did. Spend some time with him in prayer in the morning. Spend some time asking him. The God who came into creation in the form of his creation and overcame that creation, he has all the answers. He's going to tell you. And then you get to see all the things the disciples saw. The supernatural power of God's evidence in the world. The healings, the raising of the dead, the overcoming of circumstances that seem impossible. That's what we'll see. That I'm sure of. I've seen that. That I'm confident of. So the lessons that we take away from his earthly life are about how we follow him in an obedient way. And as a result of that, we get to minister to others what those keys are until his return. Amen? Amen. All right, we'll pick up next week with more wrestling of Jesus' nature. And we'll head in towards kind of summarizing and starting to think about who it is I believe Christ is. Who it is. Because as ministers of the gospel, I think that's something that, you know, if somebody were to walk up to you and say, okay, I see your life and I like your life and there's something different about you. Tell me what's different about you. And you're going to explain to them that it's Jesus. And then the next question they ask is, well, tell me about Jesus. Who is he? What is it that you believe about him? What is it that you think about him? And as we start to head into the second half of this class in the study of Christ, we need to formulate that in our own minds, in our own hearts, in our own thoughts. Who is it that I would tell others about that Jesus Christ is? By the way, it's a wildly confusing topic in the world. right? The question is, for you personally, who is that Christ? And why? Not just what you believe, but why you believe it. And as we head towards the second half of this class, that's the belief statement that we'll be writing out. I'll give you more form and function to how I want that, but the heart of it's going to be really an intimate session between you and Christ in getting clear about that, about the things that you're not clear about. Okay? Amen? Have a great week.